out over, in between desert and ocean, no horizon to speak of, complete darkness, a few lights here and there. The right engine is completely full of oil. We had sprung some kind of a major leak in the right engine. I lose first one vacuum pump, then the second vacuum pump. Now I've lost the right engine. I mean, what's next? A letter from the IRS? Hi, my name is McCauley, and I'm an international ferry pilot and professional skydiver. In 2015, I was hired by CB Aviation to ferry a Piper Navajo from Fort Lauderdale, Florida to Bangkok, Thailand. My proposed route was Bangor, Maine, where I was going to clear customs, then up to Goose Bay, Labrador, over to Narsarsuaq, Greenland, Reykjavik, then down to Wick, Scotland. After that, it was going to kind of depend on the weather, but we would go down through Europe, Saudi Arabia, Oman, then across to Pakistan, and then on into Thailand. Now, normally on these flights I fly alone, but my best friend Lee Wolfgram had been bugging me to take him on a trip. It was really fun flying with my best friend, but it turned into a little bit more than he bargained for. Our first stop was in Narsarsuaq, Greenland. Just stopped in there for fuel. It was middle of the afternoon, thought we'd have plenty of time to make it to Reykjavik. The fuel guy came up and said, "Hey boss, your right engine's smoking a little bit." It's like, oh, that's never good. And we looked over and found out that we had an oil leak. A valve cover gasket on the right engine had literally fallen apart. So not a big deal, we've got FedEx and the internet. Just order another part, should be here in a couple days. Except, of course, this is Greenland, and a couple days was going to be about 8 weeks. So that really wasn't going to work. Being a ferry pilot with maintenance experience comes in handy. I rummaged around town, finally found the local handyman who had a piece of gasket material, basically a big piece of cardboard. I took the old gasket out, set it on that, traced it out, used my third grade art skills and got a pair of scissors, cut myself a new gasket, and we were back in the air the next day. After Greenland, we went to Wick, Scotland, made our way down through Europe into the Middle East. 2 days later, we were in Saudi Arabia. Decided to take off even though there's a pretty big dust storm going on. We made that decision because they said that these storms sometimes last over a week. The vacuum pump and most of the instruments had filters on them, so I figured they'd be okay. Took off in late afternoon, climbed up, it was almost immediately IFR due to dust. And we were only in the air about 15 or 20 minutes when I had an RBL come on. The RBL is a really bad light. Those are the red lights on the dashboard that say bad things. And I'd realized that we'd lost our left vacuum pump. Now this is where having a twin engine airplane comes in handy, because that means you have 2 vacuum pumps, redundancy. And then I had a decision to make. Am I going to turn around to Riyadh and go back, or continue on to Oman? Getting a vacuum pump fixed in Riyadh was probably not really an option. I didn't see any maintenance facilities there, especially for light aircraft, so I elected to continue on. We still had another vacuum pump. Climbed up to 12,000 feet, finally got out of the dust, and it was still pretty much IFR, the sun was going down. And I'm doing the normal stuff, keeping track of my navigation, watching the GPS, and I noticed that our course was tracking to the left, and so that's really weird. And then I realized that there was another red light on the instrument panel, and I'd lost the other vacuum pump. That means my artificial horizon was no longer reliable, and my directional gyro was also no longer reliable. I was now in an actual emergency. Time to go right onto partial panel, needle ball, airspeed. I noticed that I was in a left bank, leveled the wings, and then I looked closely at the turn bank coordinator and realized it was an old style that I was kind of unfamiliar with. In most turn bank indicators, the little airplane in the middle moves or the needle moves, but in this one, the little airplane is stationary and the background, the back of the card of the instrument is what moves. So when you turn right, the card turns left, which was kind of disconcerting. It kind of took me a few minutes to get used to that, but I kind of Got a system going, you know, just kind of kept going, small corrections, got back on course, back on heading, and now was the next decision. Do we turn around? Do we land at the nearest airport? We're still about an hour and a half from Oman, so that seemed like a risky choice, but none of the other choices looked really good either. So I elected to continue on to Oman. That way, if we got it fixed there, I'm poised for my next leg over the Gulf of Arabia, and even if it didn't have maintenance facilities, you know, it's a big airport, we could have stuff flown in. And the rest of that night was pretty challenging because we're out over, you know, in between desert and ocean, no horizon to speak of, you know, complete darkness, you know, a few lights here and there. Very, you know, you couldn't trust any lights you saw, they would give you a false horizon. So I had to continue to rely on the needle ball airspeed method. Kind of started to enjoy it. It was kind of a video game, kind of a challenge to see how precise you could be, which also kept me out of trouble for losing control of the airplane. Because if you lose control of an airplane while you're in partial panel mode, it can be really difficult to recover because you don't have a pitch attitude, you have to rely on your airspeed. And then in the course of doing my normal pilot things, just because you're in an emergency, you're still on a cross-country ferry flight, so I'm checking my navigation, checking my engine instruments, and something looked a little odd over there. They're on the other side of the cockpit. And I had Lee look over and said, "What do you see on those instruments?" He goes, "The right engine oil temperature is getting pretty high, getting close to red line, and the right engine oil pressure is pretty low. That's a big red flag." Told him to stick the flashlight out the window and take a look at the right engine, and then he comes back. The right engine is completely full of oil. We had sprung some kind of a major leak in the right engine. I lose first one vacuum pump, then the second vacuum pump. Now I'm lost the right engine. I mean, what's next? A letter from the IRS? So I throttled back, kind of tried to milk that engine along for a while. The temperature kept rising, the pressure kept dropping. Time to shut it down, shut the engine down, feather the prop, retrim it up for single engine operation. Things seemed to be about as bad as they could possibly get. Got into Oman, shot the approach. It was not a bad night, it was visual, but I still kind of shot the approach. So the next morning, immediately got on the phone to the owner of the airplane and to my boss, Corey, and told him the situation. The whole engine was completely full of oil, the cowling was full of oil, took it all apart, wiped it all down, filled it back up with oil, ran it again, and you could actually see oil spurting out of one of the inboard rear cylinders. It actually had a hole in it. So kind of good news, we knew exactly what it was. It's a cylinder, they're relatively easy to change. Got my mechanic on the line, he said he got a cylinder there, he could have the plane back in the air in 24 hours. Great, that's a plan. Called the owner said, "No way, I've got my own mechanics." He'd send his guys, they'd be there later that day and they'd fix it. Okay, fine, works for me. Later that afternoon, these guys showed up, and unfortunately, they didn't speak any English, which really made things kind of challenging. Showed them what was going on, wiped the engine down again, filled it back up with oil, ran it up. They could see the oil coming out of it. They were pointing and nodding and said, "Okay, good. We're on the same page," button it back up. They started talking to their boss. I figured they were telling me, "Yep, it needs a new cylinder, we can fix this, we'll be back in the air in a day or two, perfect." So they handed me the phone, I started speaking to the owner, and he said, "So, you're all good to go, you can leave today." I'm like, I was kind of confused. "No, they didn't fix anything." He says, "Oh, they filled it back up with oil, you're good to go." I said, "But no, there's still a hole in the cylinder, it's still leaking oil. My next leg from Oman is 600, 700 miles of open ocean to India, and I'm not doing that with a engine that'll leak oil." He says, "Well, you flew the same distance from Saudi Arabia with the same engine, it still had oil left." I go, "Well, yeah, it had about 3 quarts out of 17 left. It's not good." And he disagreed with me heartily, and I said, "Look, I might be crazy, but I'm not stupid. I'll do a lot of dumb things and I'll fly a lot of junky planes in terrible conditions, but I'm not flying 700 miles of ocean with an engine that I'm sure to have to shut down." And he said, "Okay, fine." And I said, "Okay, fine." And called my boss, Corey, and I said, "If they're not going to fix it, I'm not going to fly it." Lee and I got on an airline and went home. And that's the only ferry flight that I didn't complete. And I think that plane sat there for a couple years till I finally saw that it was gone. So I had a lot of takeaways from this flight. Number one is be proficient in your partial panel flying skills. Nobody really practices that much after they get their instrument rating. I know I didn't. Just because you're having an emergency doesn't mean it's time to panic and get the plane on the ground as soon as possible. Sometimes that's not the best option. Sometimes you need to calm down and take stock of the situation, get the airplane under control and look at all your options. Don't just blindly go in the wrong direction. Me turning around and flying back through IFR conditions for an IFR partial panel approach would have been a bad idea, where instead I continued on into a VFR condition. Another big takeaway from the trip was knowledge of systems. It really is important that you know how your airplane works. Like, as soon as I knew that I'd lost both my vacuum pumps, I knew what it was going to affect. I knew I was going to lose my DG and my artificial horizon, and I knew what to do. I knew how to get on the partial panel drill, needle ball airspeed. It was an interesting trip. It had a ton of challenges. I was disappointed that I wasn't able to finish it, but at least I got home in one piece.